Everything was alive with wind and color. Bara took a deep breath. The air smelled of trees, damp but fresh. A falling leaf settled on her shoulder and worries fled. She paused long enough to wrap her scarf around her neck and then made her way across St. Cat's wooded lawn. Windfall was surrounded by a forest on 3 sides, with the ocean not far off on the 4th, and it wasn't hard to see how the town had gotten its name. As Bara turned onto Windfall Boulevard, leaves fell as thick as snow on a winter day. The oaks that lined the streets were hundreds of years old. Rather than reaching for sunlight, lower branches had grown earthward, and now selfless limbs braced the ancient giants against toppling under their own weight. At one end of the boulevard was the school district, where both St. Cat and St. X could be found, and not too far off Windfall High. You could travel from St. Cat and follow the boulevard to Library Square, the heart of the town. Several streets fed off the square. Maple Avenue ran north and would take you past a middle-class neighborhood. The home Bara sometimes shared with her mother was at the end of the avenue in the Garden District. Anything but middle class, the Garden District had some of the largest homes in North America. Continuing straight through Library Square along the east end of the boulevard, you'd pass through a heavily wooded park, a forest really, and then finally the Grand Oaks District where her father and his new wife, Courtney, lived. South of the square was the Business District, and further south the rundown area known as the Tracks. This was where Amy's family lived. But Amy attended St. Cat on scholarship, so most of the time she roomed with Bara on campus. Before reaching Library Square, Bara veered off Windfall Boulevard and cut across a small park with a fountain, a shortcut. A chestnut fell from the sky and collided with her foot. She watched it skid to a stop at the base of its parent tree. Just then her coat pocket vibrated. She stopped under the shade of the tree and took out her phone. Colin had sent a text. "Help! They're either trying to poison or starve us. Save me! Send food!" Colin was forever complaining about the meals at St. X. Day-old cat food, he called it, spiced with kitty litter. He didn't kid. Bara often took pity and brought him treats from St. Cat's dining hall. "I'll see what I can do," she texted back and continued on her way. Bara left the park and crossed Main Mall, a street of banks and a supermarket. Rounding a corner, she found the south entrance to Windfall Way. It was one of the town's original streets. It wasn't much wider than a single lane of traffic, which 400 years ago served just fine for horse and carriage. But today's large SUVs would have taken out the potted plants and store signs hanging out into the road, so now it was pedestrians only. Antique and curio shops dominated the lane. There was also 2 restaurants, French and Italian, a flower shop, a bakery, and the Tragic Sip Cafe, where without a doubt they served the best coffee on the planet. Windfall stopped and inched past way too much when it came to decorating for seasons and holidays. Along the lane, every window was filled with strings of fall leaves and pumpkins. There were even a few black cats, skeletons, and other leftover Halloween ornaments. Bara smiled at the festive air and made her way down the cobbles. The Goths had beaten her to the Tragic Sip. They occupied 2 tables. For these girls, Halloween never ended, but under the bright sunlight, even their deathly white faces glowed an almost healthy, if unnatural, pink. They were all but quivering with excitement, not the usual state of being for this gloomy group. Taking no notice of Bara as she passed, they spoke excitedly. "He's so gorgeous," Drusilla, not the name her mother gave her, Barnaby, drawled. Vixen Rose, born Vivian Rothby, returned, "I saw him first." "Finally a guy worth even thinking about in this stupid town," said a purple-haired girl Bara didn't know. She must have been in the grade below. "One thing for sure," Drusilla chimed, "we're all going to need a lot more coffee." "Oh, I want a little more than coffee from him," Vixen countered. There must be a new barista. Bara was filled with curiosity. She could only imagine what kind of guy would get the Goths all aflutter. Images of tattoos and rings hanging from each and every orifice came to mind. Well, she'd soon see Mr. Dreadfully Wonderful for herself. She headed for the cafe door and almost stopped in her tracks. Ragman, the strangest resident of Windfall, sat at the table closest to the door. He stared at her with a smirk, a way too familiar smirk. They'd never spoken, yet he always managed to irk her. He just gave her the strangest feeling. The way he dressed didn't help. His wardrobe consisted of torn pieces of old clothing tied together to form a kind of mesh. A little more skin than was decent peeked through. He wore sandals even in cold weather. His bald head was covered with a red and black bandana, and it wasn't just his head that was hairless. Except for his eyebrows, which were exceedingly bushy, he was as smooth as a porpoise. He had to wax. Swallowing her ill-ease, Bara passed Ragman, who never broke his glare, and entered the cafe. The air rang with the tinkle of door chimes. Inside was as full as the patio. Bara looked around, trying to pinpoint the object of the goth's affection. Waiting tables was Mona, a 20-something pretty brunette. Surly Bob staffed the counter. He wasn't new. No one else seemed to be working. Bara scanned the tables full of housewives taking a break from shopping, but whoever had grabbed the goth's attention had either finished his shift or was on break. Surly Bob noticed her standing in the middle of the cafe. He threw her an impatient glare and asked if she needed any help. The way he emphasized the word help made her think he meant mental help. Bara had been coming to the cafe since she'd been old enough to drink coffee, but he still treated her like a stranger. She ignored his obvious disdain and ordered 2 Black Mountain blends and a couple of croissants. While waiting for her order to be filled, she watched the back room door for any sign of the new guy. It remained closed. None too swiftly, and like he was doing her the greatest of favors, Surly Bob poured the coffees and bagged the pastry. Bara paid and stepped over to the condiment table. She took her time adding cream and cinnamon, maintaining an eye on the back room door, hoping to catch a glimpse of the new barista. Chimes rang again. Drusilla came in and sauntered over to the counter. Incidentally, she also watched the back room door. She hummed and hawed for what felt like a painfully long time, even to Bara, so to Surly Bob it must have been truly excruciating. Finally she said, "I'll have a chai." "A chai what?" Surly Bob rolled his eyes. Drusilla acted confused, thinking her request obvious. Letting out enough air to inflate a balloon, Surly Bob sighed. "A chai tea, a chai latte, a chai muffin. We got a lot of chai." Drusilla pursed her mouth and put one hand on her hip. She'd had this plan. "Then why don't you chai being nicer, dude?" And then, apparently no longer thirsty, she turned on her heels and flounced out of the cafe, leaving Surly Bob with a look on his face that could only be described as priceless. Bara fought not to laugh, but she couldn't help smiling. Surly Bob shot her a glare. Time to go. She took one last look at the back room door. No dark teenage god appeared. She shrugged and went back out into the bright sunshine. The patio was almost empty. Both the goths and Ragman had gone. Bara took a left and walked north, heading toward the tall clock tower looming ahead. She entered Library Square. In the late afternoon sun, Main Hall threw a pretty imposing shadow across the cobbles. Constructed more than 100 years ago with its marble columns and stone lions, it was a building meant to inspire awe. 2 stucco wings, built somewhat later, weren't as awe-inspiring. Stucco hadn't aged nearly as well as stone. The wings now hung off Main Hall like 2 unsightly love handles. These were the stacks. Inside they were dusty and at times smelled just a little rank, but it was where Amy and Bara always studied. There, they'd be left alone. The clock tower chimed as Bara climbed the stone steps. After taking a moment to hide the coffee, she pushed open the glass doors and passed through the entry hall and under the portrait of Nelson Sedgwick. A rich coal tycoon, Sedgwick had left quite a lot of money to the library. His hair was rather on the brighter side of red, but he'd been attractive enough. There was a kind look in his warm brown eyes. He seemed to be watching over his beloved library. Miss Corey eyed Bara up as she walked by the checkout. Bara smiled back guiltily. It wasn't just the coffee contraband. Miss Corey always made her feel a little off. Despite her petite frame, the librarian was as intimidating as a Rottweiler. Bar entered the west wing. Finding a rickety old staircase, she descended creaky metal rungs and reached into the underground portion of the stacks. Another reason she liked the stacks, they ran deep. Deep underground, actually. Underneath the 3 above-ground floors were still another 2 levels, a cellar of knowledge and fantasy. She reached the lowest floor. Somewhere down here she and Amy would find each other. They hadn't said exactly where they'd meet. They didn't need to. Bar headed for the far left corner, their usual spot. An unseen observer had watched Bar leave St. Catherine's and walk down Windfall Boulevard. Its gaze didn't flicker when she cut across the park with the chestnut trees. Patiently, it waited while she was in the cafe. It followed her across the square and watched her enter the library. Unseen by all, it pushed through the glass doors and pursued down into the stacks. It had a plan for Bara. Shuddering, it shook the air with its intent. Bara felt the breeze but saw no one. For the watcher, the eternal wait was all but over.